Imagine if, in the span of a single lifetime, our entire global civilization collapsed. The internet? Gone. International trade? Vanished. Major cities from New York to Beijing? Burned and abandoned. Even the ability to read and write? Lost for centuries. It sounds like a post-apocalyptic movie, but 3,000 years ago, it actually happened. Welcome to 10-Minute History. I'm your host, Jake Sullivan, and today we're investigating one of the greatest and most terrifying mysteries in all of human history, the Late Bronze Age collapse. Around the year 1200 BCE, the world was home to a thriving, interconnected club of superpowers. This wasn't a time of primitive, isolated tribes. It was a remarkably cosmopolitan era, a kind of ancient globalization built on treaties, royal marriages, and a single critical metal, bronze. The first major player was New Kingdom Egypt, the undisputed titan of the age. Led by legendary pharaohs like Ramesses the Great, Egypt was the world's breadbasket, its coffers overflowing with gold from Nubian mines. Their primary rivals were the Hittites, a formidable empire based in modern-day Turkey. The Hittites were masters of the three-man heavy chariot, the ancient world's equivalent of a battle tank, and their rivalry with Egypt defined the era. Across the Aegean Sea were the Mycenaeans, the civilization of Homer's Iliad and Odyssey. These were the ancestors of the classical Greeks, a maritime people who were part traders, part pirates, and whose warriors were feared across the Mediterranean. These great powers, along with others like the Babylonians and the rising Assyrians, were bound together by a sprawling trade network, and the heart of this network was bronze. To make bronze, you need about 90% copper and 10% tin. The problem was, copper mostly came from the island of Cyprus, while tin had to be imported from as far away as Afghanistan. This meant no single empire, not even mighty Egypt, could arm its soldiers or equip its farmers without international trade. This dependency was the glue holding their world together, but it was also its greatest weakness. We have a perfect snapshot of this globalized world, thanks to an incredible discovery made in 1982 off the coast of Turkey. It's called the Uluburun Shipwreck. Dated to the late 14th century BCE, this single trading vessel was carrying a mind-boggling cargo from at least 7 different cultures. On board were 10 tons of copper from Cyprus and 1 ton of tin. There were logs of ebony from Africa, elephant ivory, Baltic amber, and jars of perfume resin from Canaan. There was Mycenaean pottery, Egyptian jewelry, and swords of both Greek and Canaanite design. This one ship was a floating microcosm of the entire Bronze Age economy. It was a world of immense wealth, sophisticated diplomacy, and powerful empires. But it was a gilded cage, a rigid and over-specialized system that lacked resilience. And when a perfect storm of crises hit, the entire structure came crashing down. The end didn't happen overnight. It began with tremors of stress in the decades before 1200 BCE. The Hittite Empire, despite its military might, was in trouble. Clay tablets reveal the Hittite king desperately begging the Egyptian pharaoh for shipments of grain to keep alive the land of Hatti. The great land empire couldn't feed itself, a terrifying sign of widespread crop failures, likely caused by a changing climate. Meanwhile, in Greece, the Mycenaeans were clearly afraid of something. They began building massive new walls around their palace citadels, reinforcing them with giant cyclopean blocks of stone, and even engineering secret underground water supplies to prepare for long sieges. Then, the wave of destruction hit. In Anatolia, the end of the Hittite Empire was swift and total. Around 1180 BCE, the great capital of Hattusa was violently sacked and burned to the ground, never to be inhabited again. The entire Hittite administration, their language and their writing system, simply vanished from history. The wealthy trading cities of the Levant, the middlemen of the ancient world, were next. The most heartbreaking evidence comes from the city of Ugarit in modern Syria. Archaeologists found a collection of clay tablets in a kiln, an oven where they were being baked to be preserved for delivery. They were never sent. The city was destroyed while they were still in the oven. One of these final letters is from Ugarit's king, a desperate plea to a neighboring ruler. He writes, "My father, behold, the enemy's ships came, My cities were burned, and they did evil things in my country. Does not my father know that all my troops and chariots are in the land of the Hittites, and all my ships are in the land of Luca? The country is abandoned to itself. It is the last recorded message from a doomed kingdom. Ugarit was put to the torch. Across the sea in Greece, the lights went out entirely. The great Mycenaean palaces at Pylos, Mycenae, and Tiryns were all systematically destroyed. Administrative tablets found in the ashes at Pylos speak of a final, desperate mobilization, with watchers guarding the coast and offerings being made to the gods. It wasn't enough. In the aftermath, Greece plunged into a true dark age. The population may have declined by as much as 90%. The art of writing was completely lost for over 400 years. People abandoned the cities and lived in small, impoverished villages. The sophisticated civilization of the heroes of Troy was gone. Amidst this universal devastation, only one great power survived: Egypt. But it was a hollow victory. The reign of one of the last great pharaohs, Ramesses III, was a desperate fight for survival. His temple at Medinet Habu is covered in carvings that tell the story of his war against a mysterious coalition of invaders, the Egyptians called the Sea Peoples. So who were these Sea Peoples? For a long time, they were blamed for the entire collapse. But the Egyptian reliefs tell a more complex story. The invaders included groups like the Peliset, who we now identify as the Philistines, the Cheker, and the Denyen, who may have been Greek. Crucially, the carvings show them not just as warriors, but as a mass migration of people, traveling with their families in heavy ox carts. They weren't just raiders. They were displaced people, refugees, looking for a new home. Ramesses III met them in two massive battles, one on land and one in the mouths of the Nile Delta. He won a crushing victory, saving Egypt from total destruction. But the wars exhausted the treasury. Egypt lost its empire and entered a long period of decline. It was the last man standing, but it was standing alone in a world of ruins. So what truly caused this apocalypse? The old theory of the Sea Peoples as a band of destructive marauders is now seen as too simple. Modern science and archaeology point to a systems collapse, a perfect storm of multiple calamities that hit at the same time, each one making the others worse. The first and most important ingredient was climate change. Pollen analysis and studies of ancient lakebeds show that a severe 300-year megadrought struck the eastern Mediterranean right at this time. This led to widespread famine, which explains the Hittites' desperate need for grain. This famine would have sparked internal rebellions, as starving peasants rose up against the elite in the palaces. Second, add in what seismologists call an earthquake storm. There's evidence of widespread earthquake damage at many cities during this period, which would have wrecked palaces and harbors, further crippling these societies. Third, all this chaos, famine, and destruction is what created the Sea Peoples. They weren't the cause of the collapse. They were a symptom. They were desperate Mycenaeans, Anatolians, and others, uprooted by famine and war, who took to the sea as migrants and pirates to survive. They then became another stressor on the system, attacking the few remaining stable areas like Egypt. The interconnectedness that had been the Bronze Age's greatest strength became its fatal flaw. The system was so complex and interdependent that when one part failed, it created a domino effect, a cascading failure that brought the whole structure down. The immediate result was a dark age that lasted for centuries. It was a poorer, more violent, and more isolated world. Literacy vanished, international trade stopped, and the great cities became ghost towns. But paradoxically, this destruction paved the way for a radical rebirth. The collapse of the old world created a power vacuum, a clean slate for new ideas and new peoples to emerge. The disruption of the bronze trade forced people to perfect a new, more accessible metal, iron. Because iron ore is found almost everywhere, it democratized weaponry and tools. No longer could a king control metal production through long-distance trade. This gave rise to the Iron Age. The collapse of the old empires also allowed new groups to rise. The Philistines settled on the coast of Canaan. The Phoenicians rose from the ashes of the old Canaanite cities to become the great traders of the Iron Age. And in the hill country, the collapse of Egyptian control allowed for the emergence of the Israelites. Perhaps the most important legacy came from the death of the old, complicated writing systems. The Phoenicians perfected a revolutionary new technology, the alphabet. With only a few dozen letters, it was easy to learn. Literacy was no longer the sole property of an elite scribal class. The Greeks would later adopt this alphabet, add vowels, and use it to write the philosophy, drama, and science that became the foundation of Western civilization. The alphabet you are reading with right now is a direct descendant of this invention, born from the ashes of the Bronze Age. The story of the Bronze Age collapse holds up a chilling mirror to our own time. In its fragile, interconnected economy, we can see our own vulnerable global supply chains. In the climate-driven migrations of the sea peoples, we see a grim warning about our own climate crisis. It's a powerful cautionary tale, reminding us that progress is not guaranteed, and that complexity is not the same as strength. But it's also a story of resilience. It shows that even after a catastrophe of epic proportions, humanity adapts, rebuilds, and innovates. The end of one world, however traumatic, became the dawn of a new one. The First Dark Age was not just an ending. It was the violent, painful, and ultimately transformative beginning of the world we live in today. So what are your thoughts on this? Do you see parallels to our world today? Let us know down in the comments. If you found this interesting or learned something new, please give this video a like, and don't forget to subscribe to 10-Minute History for more deep dives. Thanks for listening.